From SBI's Executive Briefing Center in Dallas, Texas, the most watched and listened to content in B2B sales and marketing, it's the SBI Podcast with your host, Matt Shares.
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Shares. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Growth Help Desk. I'm really excited about today's show. We're going to talk about the CEO's guide to navigating a really complex commercial organization. So think about this. If you are a company and if you are a CEO who has grown through acquisition, frequently you have multiple go-to-market models and you must navigate, but you also must integrate. This often leads to a ton of commercial complexity, high customer acquisition cost, potentially employee morale frustrations, and you don't have the right fact base. Clients are confused, customers are confused, and all the synergies you assumed you were going to get, you don't get. So there is no better guest I could probably find in the world than today's guest, which is Steve Smith. Steve's the CEO at Zayo, and they're a leading global provider of dark fiber networks. He's in over 400 markets. Steve's resume speaks for himself. Before that, he led Equinix. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. But Steve, always great to see you, brother. How are you?
Very, very good. Good to see you too. And looks like you're holding up well, but I'm happy to be here with you today.
Yeah. So Steve, I guess before we jump into the show and you've been kind enough to share your time and your insight with us, maybe just talk about a little bit of your background leading up to the current role and how you became so well-versed really over your decades in business, and then what Zayo does and how the audience should think about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the quick version is I've been doing this for a very long time, longer than I care to put a number on. But I've been in four or five big technology companies, and I've had the opportunity to sales manage, P&L manage, country manage, lived around the world, lived in 5 different countries, had been a chief sales officer at the end of a journey in one company, a big $20 billion tech company is in your old neighborhood in Dallas. It doesn't exist anymore because Hewlett Packard bought it, so EDS is gone. And then I spent a couple of years at HP running all their services business globally, and that gave me more opportunity to learn about scale and reach. I had about 60,000 people in the organization all over the world. And then I got searched out of there to go to this company called Equinix back in 2007. And to be very candid, I had never even heard of the company. It was the beginning stages of the business model called co-location, where companies would co-locate their internet infrastructure in these big data centers. Turned out to be the best decision I've probably ever made. Spent 11 years there and scaled that company to a very large platform that was in 28 countries and several markets around the world, where we provided data center capacity to the world's leading companies that were running all their internet infrastructure. And then most recently was afforded the opportunity to do it again with another infrastructure company called Zayo, as you pointed out, which is one of the largest independent bandwidth infrastructure providers, headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. As you also pointed out, Matt, made up of about 43 plus acquisitions. So lots of complexity in the integration, in the synergies, and in the business model. But we provide mission critical connectivity to some of the largest companies in the world, the largest wireless companies, the largest communications businesses, the largest hyperscalers, and very large enterprises. It was started in 2007, so it's only 13 years old, went public in 2014, and then just got taken private in March of 2020.
Okay.
And it was actually the largest LBO, second largest LBO in the last decade. It was a $14.3 billion transaction at $35 a share to take the company private.
Well, and Steve, I've had the advantage of getting to know you over the last few years. The run you had at Equinix and pure organic, right? Like you said, sometimes it's good fortune, but it's okay to take some credit. You did some great things, and the team did some great things on that run. It really is a great business model. So I think one of the things that was going to be so fun for us to dive into as CEOs navigate the complexity of inorganic, and they start to make decisions and going after inorganic. You've now walked into a canvas where you're looking at it very holistically. You're looking at it with kind of one customer lens. You didn't come from one of the acquired companies. You weren't the acquirer. You're really neutral. So I guess I want to use that to normalize for the audience. And what Steve and I are going to talk about in this first segment is, Stevie, we just sort of set the fact base, like from a customer experience standpoint, and we'll get to employees, but customer experience, when you see almost 4 dozen acquisitions come together, how do you think about having one voice? How do you think about having one message? And then translate that to one go-to-market model. What does that look like? So I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, really good question. So this company has done a really good job integrating and getting synergies out and creating a one company model under the Zayo banner.
Yeah.
Really good job. You don't really hear about you don't hear the history of the other companies that they came from very often at all. So they've done a terrific job cobbling together more network density all over the world. And so as the audience would know, some 20 years ago when the internet was just stepping up, fiber optics replaced copper and microwave. It started to enable this massive explosion of bandwidth.
Right.
And then as we all know, over the last 9-10 months with COVID, the demand for broadband and for bandwidth connectivity around the world is just exponential. So we're playing at the intersection of the greatest trends in the world.
No doubt.
There's a new wireless architecture unfolding called 5G. Cloud computing is going to another wave. Everything's pushing further out to the tier 2, tier 3 markets. And so we're in a good place. And so there's a lot of things we're doing today to make ourselves easier to consume. Mm-hmm. It's part of the exercise we're doing. We have to get faster at service delivery. We have to innovate at a higher rate now with our product set. So the 13 years the company's been together, what's in the toolkit today has worked very, very well. But now everything's becoming software defined, as you know, and everything's becoming virtual, as you know. And so we're having to go innovate at a higher rate now for the next chapter. But at the end of the day, you know, it's all about people winning as a team. And so customers see that. You know that as well as I do. And I've always been a big fan. I think customers worship teams that play well together. So we're doing a lot of work here to make the team work together and satisfy where the customers want to go for the next generation.
So Stephen, in doing that, and your peers that are watching, when they say, okay, I'm going to put the customer at the center of everything. Sorry, okay, I get it. But that cascades into decisions around, well, what do we standardize versus what do I allow to be decentralized and stay close to the company? You and I have both worked in matrixed and functional organizations. I am often asked which org design model makes more sense. And the answer, unfortunately, is it depends, because you got to look at stage appropriate. You got to look, and you talked about the intersection between, you have market factors right now, right? You also have a capital structure that says, you know, you're expected to generate a return for your LPs. So what were maybe the criteria that you've used as you walked in the first couple of months to help you sort of say, all right, in this next kind of 3 years, 4 years, we can't do everything. This probably is in the box. This is probably not in the box and will probably be 2025 and beyond. How did you think through that?
Yeah, really good question. For me, it starts in every company or every business unit I've gone in to run. I start with assessing the market, the sales, and the operational readiness of the company. Mm-hmm. The first thing I do everywhere I've been, and I know most of the CEOs do this, they're very good at it when they start to go do change management in the company, is I call it the 3 L's. I listen, I learn the business, and then I start leading. So I've been 2.5 months into this thing. I've done a lot of listening and a lot of learning about the business model. And I typically ask a set of questions to all the employees. I ask them, what do you want to preserve? What are the top 2 to 3 things you want to preserve here? Because typically they're going to be very transparent, and they have been. Secondly, I'll ask them, what are the top 2 or 3 things you think I should consider changing to make things go faster and get simpler? I ask about the culture. I really want to always understand the culture and what makes this place hum. I also ask them, give me the top 2 to 3 levers that you think if we pull correctly will accelerate growth. This thing's all about growth, right? Everybody's got to grow. So there's not a CEO that's listening to this conversation that doesn't agree with that. I also ask, what are the top 2 to 3 business processes that if we pull them to give us the greatest opportunity for improvement? Yep. Typically underneath, there's always processes that are slow and there's drag. I always want to know priorities. I always want to know what all the leaders' priorities are. And then I end with, what are you most concerned about the next 2 to 3 years? And I want them to get out and look out a little bit and say, tell me what you're worried about here. Are we going to get disrupted in some form? What bothers you? So I spent a lot of time with the employees. We're now unpacking the operating model. We're looking at building design principles, and then we're getting very close to building some structure changes that we believe will simplify the business, because as you stated up front, Matt, we brought a lot of companies together. So I've got in this company 12 delivery organizations, 8 product organizations. And so we're at that point to the core of your question. We'll decentralize certain functions that we want to keep very close to the customer, and we will centralize functions at this juncture that we want to scale the company on.
Perfect. What a great answer. So Steve, it's interesting, and for the audience, I've had the benefit of getting to know Steve in a couple of different roles, and him actually serving as a de facto mentor that I made him volunteer for. Steve, the 3L component, what I love about that, I think often new CEOs walk in and they do it, but after a while, some CEOs stop doing the first two, and they just lead. And you just gave me a good reminder as we've just kicked off our new year that you can never stop listening and almost disrupting yourself as a leader and saying, okay, just because I've been at SBI for a long, long time, oftentimes you get a little bit of the I know what's best, as opposed to going back down, listening, and learning again and relearning, because things change. So on that note, Steve, if you think about so you've now got this view around commercial effectiveness and what's going to be closer to the customer, standardization around support functions being closer to corporate, if you will. As you think about laying out growth objectives and sort of cascading the hockey stick, right, if you will, up and to the right, have you been able to land on, are you looking at things from your lens of productivity per head, whatnot, or are you, at your purview, sitting back and saying, as long as we hit the enterprise value in some combination of taking some of the bloat out, and I'm going to bring in the right chief commercial officer or chief revenue officer, whatever structure you decide, I'm good. Like, where do you toggle your point of view from a data perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. The getting to the right model now is the core of what the assignment I have here.
Oh, I totally agree. And Steve's point to the audience, I would tell you, we travel with the belief at SBI when you're stepping into something like what Steve's stepping into, there's always an element of getting that right fact base and listening and doing exactly what Steve's doing. But then as you set out on the journey, you've got to make sure that the company, that the employees and the customers have the endurance, the corporate endurance to sustain the change. So Steve, what I found interesting is from a change management perspective, something I've learned both from leading work and then messing it up, leading SBI as we've evolved, is sometimes folks in our roles can see the future so clearly and you want to get there, but you almost have to plan. It's going to take a little longer than the model says, and you almost got to plan that a little slower start to accelerate as opposed to rushing the first 2 years. And this is where we see LBOs go wrong, especially back in like 14, 15, 16, when all the software companies got started taking private. It was a lot of failed attempts at transformation. So with that lead in, maybe share a couple change management lessons, even with all the success you've had, as you walk into this new opportunity where you're like, hey, from the Steve Smith perspective, these are a couple things where maybe I made a mistake earlier in my career, and I'm not going to do it again in this next assignment.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to, I wanted to understand the current state of the environment. So you got to start there. Then we're starting to consider the future state of where we want to go. So we're looking out to see where the market is shifting to. I want to get the plumbing and wiring right. That's critical here to adjust it from an inorganic machine to an organic machine. Sure. Because now we're calling it an operating model review. We're not calling it an organizational adjustment. So It's an operating. We start with the operating model. So we went deep into what's core to the company. Where is our competitive differentiation? I think you really have to understand that. If that's slipped on you, you need to go back and really identify and be really clear about your top 3 to 5 competitive differentiation things. We then decided on aligning on strategic objectives. Where we want to play in the future. How do we win in the future, and what our priorities are to do that. We came up with an ambition statement. Yep. So an ambition statement is where we want to land at the end of this journey. And so, yes, we have a mission and a vision and values and core principles, et cetera. But we've kind of built this around building a new ambition for the next wave. And luckily, as I said, we've got everybody who wants to do this. And so we're developing these options right now, Matt. So I think structure and accountability getting clear, and the change management, we're at the beginning of that now with our customers and the employees. And it's super critical that, we bring everybody with us. And there's lots of change that's going to happen here. So we really studied the design principles. So one of the mistakes I've made before is I didn't sit down and really understand the design principles about the future state.
So Steve, I guess as we wrap up, my takeaway from what you just said, and I guess for the audience, if I paraphrase for Steve, is look out 3 to 4 years, whatever your time horizon, and look back, more of a future back strategy than sort of where we are and where we're going. And that sounds simple, but the ability to kind of chart those milestones, right? To say, hey, if I'm going on a 4-year journey, in 2022, what would define success? We're not done. It's one chapter of the 4-chapter narrative in this first kind of phase that I think I can reach out and touch it. It's not the 2030 big aspiration, but it's not the next 6 months, right? Which is operating in the weeds, and it's pretty much decided what's going to happen in the next 6 months. So Steve, I love that midpoint you've created.
You've triggered me on another thought that I want to leave with you, with your audience.
Please.
And I love your concept of the revenue growth office and what are best practices around how to think about that. I do think anybody coming in to lead a company today, you've got to do 3 things really well. You got to be, number one, thoughtful about strategy.
Yep.
And whatever your current advantage is, figure out how to keep pressing it.
Yep.
Make sure you're positioned to catch the next wave, and you want to scale that company. So that's all underneath the idea of thoughtful strategy. I think the second thing you got to do while you're making changes is you've got to stay hard-nosed execution on your key metrics. And that's key. I'm getting a lot of pressure now to transform the company, but don't miss your quarter. You've got to perform while you're transforming. And so I am a stickler on, and I stress test the heck out of bookings, customer churn, revenue, margins, pricing, returns, customer sat. So those things are critical to keep a hard-nosed execution on. And then at the end of the day, people will follow you if you bring inspired leadership. And I want to push inspired leadership all the way to the front lines. And we have a little work to do on that here. And then, the last thing I'd leave with you, unless you got another question, Matt, is one of the things that I think that I've learned over the years that really makes a difference in running a company is what I call operating mechanisms. What are your mechanisms? What are the simple, repeatable, enforceable meeting cadence where you make decisions and assign accountability? What you do weekly, what you do monthly, what you do quarterly. I call them operating mechanisms.
Yep.
But I find everywhere I've been, I go in and I look at them, and we're not clear, and we're not closing. We're not making decisions. We're not holding people accountable in the meeting. I think meeting cadence or operating mechanisms is an absolute critical, top-notch best practice that leaders need to pay attention to.
I couldn't agree with you more, Steve. I mean, I don't have any questions. Probably more of a build, and then I know we got to let you scoot, and because your time is incredibly valuable. We've seen from a accelerating perspective or a best practice perspective, the power of the daily stand-up. And you and I have talked about cadence. And my first sales job 25 years ago, I was raised in a hardcore sales culture at Cintas, where Monday morning sales meeting, Monday morning on the phone. I'm an inside sales guy. Had to write my appointments on the whiteboard every 55 minutes. I was allowed 5 minutes to get coffee and water, and back on the phones. And I'm telling you, man, whether EMC, Cintas, ADP, or if you start in a sales factory, cadence. And typically people think about daily stand-ups as something in product. And to me, it's if you're not doing this as a commercial leader, and even as a CEO, as I run SBI, we do daily stand-ups with my senior team. And it's 10 minutes. But it gets you in that rhythm of my number one thing I got to get done today. What was my number one thing from yesterday that I wanted to get done? Did I do it? Where am I stuck? And just getting in that rhythm and cascading that through the employees. So, Steve, it was a great way to end. I know it wasn't really kind of a core question, but I agree with you.
I have one final thought for you.
Oh, please.
I have one final thought for you, and you'll love this, being a great athlete that you are. I always love, I think being obsessed with finding a better way is critical. I love the question of winning. So I'm trying to help this company get back to a higher winning rate, and that's what it's all about, right? We got to get more bookings, we got to grow faster, and we got to win. Winning is good. Winning is good. I always laugh when people say, well, it's okay if you lose, if you have lessons learned. No, if winning wasn't important, then why do we keep score? right?
Yeah.
So
Amen.
winning is a good thing. And it's once you get momentum with the morale of a company to start winning again, it can bring magic to a culture.
Awesome. Well, Steve, I know we could go for a long time. First off, man, thank you so much. Wealth of knowledge, and cheering for you and wishing you the best of luck on this next run. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. We'll be in touch. Take care of yourself.
Audience, listeners, how lucky we were to have Steve share his insights. Hopefully you had a couple of takeaways. I know I did, right? The power of listening, but keeping that rhythm. If you think about how employees have feedback and staying close to your customers and maintaining that, and operating mechanisms in the operating model. Cadence matters. So until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on the studio, SBI's Executive Briefing Center, our team, or to schedule a workshop, please visit salesbenchmarkindex.com.